In the middle of the countryside, a clock tower and a bell. But this wasn't a church calling people to prayer. It was a factory calling them to work. The cotton factory was a new world 200 years ago, an exciting and dramatic sight for the traveller, lit up at night like a great battleship in the hills. Because they were water-driven, the first cotton mills were usually built away from the towns in strikingly beautiful settings among the brooks and streams. This is Stile Mill in Cheshire. But where could the mill owners find their workers? Wanted at Cromford in the county of Derby, framework knitters and weavers with large families, likewise children of all ages above 7 years old. Factories employed mostly women and children, but owners had to persuade the whole family to move nearby. Darley Mill promised to give each family a house and a cow, but few families wanted to give up their old way of living. The old cotton industry had been based at home, and women and children worked there at their own pace. It was one thing for a man's wife and daughters to work at their spinning around the fire. It was to be quite a different matter for them to go out to work in a factory and be paid wages. Work inside a factory wasn't like work at home. You couldn't stop to cook a meal or feed a baby, or go outside for a break and tend the vegetable patch. It began and ended according to the factory clock and the factory bell, and people had to work to the noisy rhythms of the machinery. The water wheel was master here. It was nothing like a house, more like an institution, with hundreds of people at work under one roof. This was not a factory, although it looked like one. It was the London workhouse for the poor in Bishopsgate. Large cities, especially London, had poor houses and workhouses for people with no money at all. That didn't only mean the unemployed. These were places for homeless old people, for children with no parents, for anyone who was beyond hope. There were 400 children in the Bishopsgate workhouse. The Bishopsgate workhouse looked like a prison. In many ways it was. When working people looked at factories, they were reminded of buildings like this. Little wonder they were reluctant to go inside. So the factory owners began to look for new sources of workers, and they turned to the poorhouses and workhouses of London. There they found orphan children, with no parents to keep them out of the factory. In 1799, Robert Blincoe was an orphan in the St Pancras workhouse. He didn't know his age. He was, he thought, 7. He was one of 80 children sold for 14 years to a cotton mill in Nottingham. He was given 1 shilling, a handkerchief and a piece of gingerbread. Then he was put on a cart and taken away to his new life. The journey took 4 days. The children were told they would be apprentices, learning a trade and being fed on roast beef and plum pudding. But when they arrived, they heard villagers saying, "God help the poor wretches." Little do they know to what a life of slavery they are doomed.
We have a piece of bread first thing, before we start work at 5:30 in the morning. Breakfast is at 8:30. Only 10 minutes is allowed, so we take it in the mill. Breakfast is porridge. At 1 o'clock we have ½ an hour for dinner. We usually get milk and potatoes, sometimes bacon on Wednesdays. And at 5:30 we get porridge again and carry on working until 8:30 at night. Then we get a piece of bread and go to bed. I'm usually very tired.
Boys like Blinko were supposed to spend their 14 years learning the art of cotton spinning. The work wasn't difficult, but it was dangerous.
I fell over and put my hand out to stop myself falling. I caught hold of the driving wheel and it cut my finger off. I was off work for 4 days and it had to go in the accident book.
Because the children were supposed to be learning, they had no right to wages. They just got their food and a place to sleep and were sometimes rewarded for good work.
They don't pay us wages, but sometimes Mr. Gregg sees you've been working hard and he leaves sixpence on a piece of machinery. One girl he left sixpence twice on the same day.
Mr. Gregg was the mill owner at Stile. He tried to look after his apprentices and wouldn't take children under 10. He had a doctor when the children were hurt and extra rewards for good workers at Christmas. There were other mills that were very much worse. It was common for children to be half-starved.
We lodged in an apprentice house near the mill. We were under the care of Richard Sims and his wife. The rooms are very clean and whitewashed once a year. Our beds are good. We sleep to a bed and have clean sheets once a month and new clothes for Sunday once in 2 years. I've heard much worse of other mills.
The apprentice house at Stile had over 150 children crammed inside. They slept in the attic, in box beds like the poorhouse, 2 to a bed. They had to get up at 5 in the morning. Usually they had no soap, so oil from the machinery stayed on their skin and soaked into the bedding. It was all very like the workhouse, and, like the workhouse, it was a prison. When runaways were caught, they were brought back and punished.
Are they going to leave Kathy Quigley locked up all over Christmas?
Looks like it. Serves her right too. Fancy running away at Christmas time.
You can talk. You ran away yourself once.
That were to see me man. Kathy ran away just to see some friends.
She hasn't got a man. She came from the workhouse same time as me.
I saw him bring her back. She was leaning on store, pretending to be ill she was, so they wouldn't be too hard on her. All of a sudden, down she goes, flat on floor. What did they do? Mrs. Shawcross took one look at her. Right, she says, get up, go on, get up.
And did she?
Course not. Kathy just lay there, still as a stone. Oh, Shawcross weren't bothered one bit. You got yourself down there, so you can get yourself up. But if we pick you up, we lock you up. Is that clear? What happened then? Well, bit by bit, Kathy came to. Leastways pretended to. Where am I, she says. What's happened? All limp as a lily.
What did Mrs. Shawcross say?
You know full well what happened and what's going to happen. So they put her in storeroom and she's been there ever since.
When Blinko tried to run away from his mill, he too was caught and brought back to work. He was not yet 8 years old. 2,000 London children were apprenticed to mills over a 9-year period. 500 of them disappeared. 170 escaped. 80 died of exhaustion, injuries or illness caused by cotton dust in their lungs. But no one knows what happened to the lost 500. No one even bothered to find out. After all, they were only orphans from the poorhouse, and there were plenty more where they came from. The mills were hot, and the air inside was damp and full of dust. The main problem was working fast enough to keep up with the machines, especially when children got tired. The greatest danger was catching their clothes in the machinery, being pulled in and crushed. The last job of the day was to search for children who had collapsed, exhausted, and had no strength to walk to bed.
Sunday we haven't got to work. We have to walk to the church in the morning. It's about 2 miles there and 2 miles back again. After dinner we have our lessons. We learn reading, writing and arithmetic. There's a music teacher too.
The owners of Stile Mill, the Gregg family, tried to make sure that the children there did get some education. The Greggs built themselves a fine house overlooking the factory, and from there they took a close interest in the children's progress. Unusually, they didn't approve of beating children. Instead, they had a system of fines, which were paid by doing extra work, even though the apprentices were pitifully rewarded before being fined. The Greggs were a religious family, and they believed it was their duty to educate the children in their care. Sunday afternoon, after church, must have been the only time for reading and writing.
The world for me. When fuss and fret was all my fare, it got no ground as I could see, so when away...
There is no record of when the children were allowed to play, and of course they had no money to buy toys. Many of the children must have been like Blinko, not sure of their own age, so certainly never able to have a birthday. In fact, there were children who were not even sure of their real names. They were, whoever they were named, on a piece of paper in the mill office.
Chance or change of peace or pain, for fortune's favour or her frown.
Games must have been snatched in odd moments, when the machinery was being repaired, or when it was too dark to continue working. They had very few things to play with, but that didn't necessarily mean they never had any enjoyment at all, even if it was just from telling stories, perhaps a ghost story.
Don't mention graveyards to me. I can't abide going through the one at Wilmslow, even in the summer. That's because of the ghost.
What ghost?
Don't you tell that tale again, Nellie Biggs. I don't want to hear it. Don't you know it? Well now, there was this girl in Wilmslow, buried alive by her husband. By all accounts, she's the most beautiful creature. But her husband, who was much older than she was, went wild if another man so much as looked at her. He were that jealous. Well, one day he did go right off his head like, and poisoned her. But the poison didn't work proper. So, after they put her coffin into one of them stone tombs in churchyard, she woke up and started screaming to get out. Someone happened to hear her. By the time they'd finally opened the coffin, her hands were all red raw from trying to claw her way out. And sometimes, if you go into the churchyard at the dead of night, you can hear her moaning and her fingernails on big lidded coffin going. Stop it, will ya? What sort of talk is this for Christmas?
In 1822, when Robert Blincoe's story was published, a great many people were horrified. Parliament was already investigating how children were treated in the mills, and in 1833 it was forbidden for children under 10 to work in factories. By then the mills were changing. Steam power replaced the water wheel, so factories didn't have to be in the countryside. They were built in towns, where there were adults to work in them. Towns like Manchester and Bolton became densely packed with cotton mills, with thousands of young women working the machines. Though even as late as 1918, children only had to be 12 years old before they were allowed to start work. In 1918, Sarah Edwards still had to get up at 5 a.m., the same time as Blincoe had, more than 100 years earlier.
It was terrible in the cotton mill. I used to go 5 o'clock in the morning, about 4 or 5 of us walking down a little basket and clogs and shawl on. And we had to walk about, long way through 2 or 3 fields for shortcuts and over a canal. And then when we got in the cotton mill, there'd be the machinery'd start up straight away, and the noise alone was terrible. Well, you used to run in your bare feet, get a square box like that, and there used to be a little ledge on the bottom, and you'd ledge it onto a little runner on the machine, like a steel thing, and you'd rest it on your tummy, and you'd slide it along, and you'd doff these bobbins off into your box. You all had a portion of bobbins how many to take off, and it was all real lightning work, quick work, until really, if you wasn't used to it, you was always a little slow coach, and I was one of them. And of course I used to break a lot of ends down, so when you had to go back with a bobbin under your arm, one of the bobbins, the ordinary bobbins, and get the under your little finger like that, the cotton, and piece up, and the rollers was going like that, like lightning. Well, I used to be frightened, my fingers going under them rollers, and you had to wet your fingers to join them up. I couldn't get used to it. Oh, and I used to go home and cry, but no, I had to stick it. Mother wouldn't let me leave.
In the end, everybody had to leave. In the last 30 years, the cotton industry in Britain has collapsed completely. It was once Britain's biggest industry. It made Britain into a great power, the first industrial nation. Now it's over. Children don't work in factories anymore.